mass destruction. That's okay when they get that one wrong, but they can't get this one wrong. Okay, fine.
Why are you
fine.
blaming Israel for that? It was your own government lying to us about that. I was protesting against the war in Iraq exactly the same way you and Pierce.
We all oppose.
But it was our government lying to us. It wasn't about Israel. Why is everything that happens in the world the fall of Israel Day?
Oh, dang. So now even they're starting to see it. Even Konstantin's starting to kind of see that, like, Dave Smith has Israel on the brain, you know,
whole time. And she was, and lies that, as you pointed out, insult the intelligence of the host and the viewers. And I thought you were absolutely right to give her pushback for that. So it was, I thought, number one, I thought you were right on the show. Obviously, admittedly, I'm a little bit biased on the topic, but I thought the reaction online was just truly embarrassing.
You know what was interesting? If they'd actually just said to me, you know what, Piers, did you go a little bit too far in the interrupting? Could you have reined back 10, 20%? I probably would have said yes, probably. I conceded that to some friends of mine. Yeah, probably slightly overdid it. My mother's always a good litmus test. She was like, you did go at her a bit. You know, I was like, okay. But then I was reminded that she was telling massive whoppers with real consequential elements to them, denying, you know, appalling things like the killing of the 9 out of 10 children in that one airstrike and so on, or at least trying to cast doubt over whether it had been proven, which I just found so reprehensible. But also, I just felt this is somebody who purports to be an international barrister in this area, who's clearly not, has got a horse in the race, right? Because it's Lawyers for Israel is who she represents. If you can't handle a bit of interrupting from someone like me, you're probably in the wrong profession, is what I thought. It's like, it's supposed to be part of your job, literally arguing with people, often in an animated way. Anyway, let's get into this argument.
Yeah, let's get into this.
Because this was precipitated, for those who don't follow you guys as assiduously as I do, and I'm a big fan of both of you. Konstantin, you called out Dave on X for accusing the actor Rob Schneider of talking with confidence on topics he doesn't necessarily understand. You said that's exactly what Douglas Murray had accused Dave of doing when they had a spat on Joe Rogan. And you said on X, I'm not trying to be a dick, but this is exactly what Douglas was saying to you. He was saying you talk about things you don't understand with a level of confidence that is inappropriate, and you pretended he was calling for censorship. You can't have it both ways. Okay, you've got Dave sitting here. You don't want to be a dick, which I appreciate, because I've had a fistful of that from George Galloway this week. So let's not get into dick measurement contests. But this whole argument, really, about people who are supposedly ill-equipped to talk about things, whether it's Dave, because he's a comedian by stock in trade, whether it's Rob Schneider, whether it's anyone, really. Explain where you come from on that.
Well, first of all, you say it's been precipitated by this. I think the disagreements between Dave and I run about as long as the Iran-Israel conflict, so and probably longer. So we disagree on a lot of stuff. You've invited me on your show many, many times over the last year. I've always said no when talking about this stuff because I don't consider myself an expert on these issues, which is why I've consistently turned it down. The only reason I'm here tonight, by the way, is you said to me, I'm not going on your show until you come back on mine. And I thought that was actually fair enough. So particularly...
Dave didn't get the memo about the blue shirt and the coat, you know? Come on, Dave. Dude. Come on. You're ruining my 3 of a kind here.
Given that you have me here with somebody who's also not an expert, this is essentially 2 guys in a bar, in a pub, chatting about their opinions. So that's fine. However, I think the reality is that an issue of this complexity and seriousness should not be addressed by a former comedian and a current comedian. I don't really think that's the right approach. But my point to Dave is something else. My point to Dave is whenever he wants to take a shortcut and disagree with someone who's saying something that's different to him, he will resort to exactly the same thing that Douglas said to him, which is, you actually don't really know what you're talking about. You don't have the expertise to talk about this. You haven't been to the region. You haven't read enough. You haven't done this. You haven't done that. And that's exactly what Douglas was saying to Dave. Now, you can agree or disagree with whether that's right or wrong, but the fact that Dave is violating his own standards seems to me to be pretty hypocritical.
Dave, you're a rank hypocrite.
That's what Pierce saying and not me. I did not add the word rank.
Yeah, he would have done if he thought about
a bit. No, I'm sorry. There's for the record, I just want to say me and Rob Schneider made up. I've always been a big fan of his. We message back and forth and we're cool. But no, I'm sorry. obviously this is ridiculous, and there's no hypocrisy here at all. It is, if we were to come to a debate, and what I brought to the debate was I just said, shut up. And that was all I did for the debate, was just tell you to shut up. And I had no argument, and I didn't counter any of your arguments, but I just told you to shut up. And you were to say, man, that was a really ridiculous way to debate. And then I pointed out that you had also told someone to shut up once in your life. That wouldn't mean you're guilty of hypocrisy. It's a completely different standard to be dismissive to someone on Twitter than to agree to debate them on the biggest show in the world, show up in front of tens of millions of people, and your argument essentially is just to dismiss them. Your point doesn't matter. So no, and also clearly I wasn't telling Rob Schneider.
So I didn't see the entire Douglas Murray Dave Smith debate. And listen, I made a video on it. I'm not on Douglas Murray's side on that whole thing. Like, yeah, I thought once you resort to the whole, oh, you've never been argument, like you kind of lost the debate. But my understanding was they were already debating for a little bit. It wasn't like Douglas Murray just started off just by arguing. I might be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. And you can let me know in the chat. But I don't think he started off. Like, did he start off with, hey, you've never been? Or weren't they already kind of debating for a little bit there, like, you know, for a bit? And then Douglas Murray was like, oh, you've never been. Isn't that what happened? It wasn't just like he came in and just dismissed him. He didn't drive all the way over there, and then immediately when Dave starts talking, goes, hey, have you ever even been here? You know, I don't think that's what happened. Again, I might be wrong. I didn't see the entire debate. So if I am, just let me know in the chat.
Because he's a comedian, he can't have an opinion on this. I was telling him that I don't really think he knows what he's talking about on this issue. And then
which is exactly what Douglas said to you.
Yes, yeah. But he didn't back it up with anything. That's the point.
And by the way,
Konstantin, no one would have had a problem. The whole point was that Douglas had an opportunity to demonstrate his superior level of expertise and did not. And this is the overwhelming opinion.
Well, I don't think that's quite true. I think on a lot of the subjects
argue.
You debated, he actually did give very good reasons why he disagreed. Now, as you remember, I wrote an article at the time talking about that situation. I did concede that I thought Douglas should have lent more into the arguments. The way you and I have always debated has been on that basis, right? And I think that is true. But I don't think this argument about Twitter really works, because when you go on our mutual friend Joe Rogan's show, you're in front of millions of people. When you and I are exchanging, or you and Rob are exchanging arguments on X, we're also in front of millions of people. We're also having a debate. I don't understand what the difference is.
You don't understand the difference between like dismissing someone on Twitter and agreeing to debate them and showing up with
Rob
nothing but
made a series
them?
of arguments on Twitter to you in front of those same millions of people that saw you on Joe Rogan. And instead of addressing his arguments with counter arguments, which is the standard that you normally apply and you demand that other people apply to you, you instead basically said, shut up, Rob. You don't know what you're talking about.
Pierce.
Just because you read one book doesn't mean you know what you're talking about, which is exactly what a lot of people said to you. And you got very upset about it and pretended they were trying to censor you.
No, okay. There's a couple different things here. Number one, Pierce, as I told you, I believe were my first appearance after the Douglas Murray debate on Joe Rogan. And the first thing I said to you was that I go, look, there's been a lot of people who have been challenged to debates who say, I'm not going to debate that guy. He's beneath me. I've done that with other people. And then there's been people who accept and show up to the debate. I said, Douglas Murray's fatal flaw was that he did both. He accepted and then showed up and said, I'm above you. I shouldn't even be debating you. And it backfired on him. Now, as far as
Once again, Dave's making it sound like immediately right off the gate, Douglas Murray started off with the, hey, like, have you ever been pish posh? Do you even know what you're talking about? Dave's making it sound that way. Again, is that what happened? Did he immediately out the gate start off with that? Because again, I was under the impression they were debating for a bit.
Sorry, what was your second point there? I had another response to that. What was the other thing you said, Konstantin?
I don't remember the sequence of the points that I made. What do you mean exactly?
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna save you both, because I think we've probably dealt with the
come on, Piers. That's what you're supposed to do in moderating
about these things. You're both here to talk about stuff.
Ugh.
Enough about 9 to 5. What about the most important bit, the 5 to 9? It should be the most comfortable part of your
Cozy
day.
Earth. By Cozy Earth.
Absolute blinder in the Middle East. Dave, to put it mildly, does not agree.
Okay, I don't know if they're switching topics or not, but listen, I think in that section, I think Konstantin was right. I think that's absolutely, I mean, obviously there's differences there. But Dave Smith absolutely dismissed Rob Schneider right off the bat, similar to the whole Douglas Murray, Dave Smith thing.
And thinks he should now be impeached for betrayal. So first of all, Konstantin, why, in your estimation, has Trump played an absolute blinder?
Just to put this in context, I said this, I think, on Friday. I spent that week when these initial strikes happened in Washington, D.C. And the point that I was making is, I don't think that, certainly none of the people I met in Washington, D.C. with any insider knowledge thought that Benjamin Netanyahu had ordered these strikes without at least a wink and a nod from President Trump. So President Trump is doing something that from what I remember, he said it between 30 and 40 times on the campaign trail, which is Iran must not be allowed to get a bomb. And he's achieving that outcome while not taking any of the blame or any of the flag for it. That was the case on Friday. Obviously, the situation has evolved since then, and there's now a much bigger debate. But at that time, he had absolutely played a blinder in allowing Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli military to achieve the military objective, while also sort of claiming that he's not involved and kind of at that time getting away with it.
If he now gets involved, as the jungle drums seem to be suggesting, that is a massive moment for Donald Trump, I would say. I mean, you could argue that is the most important decision he will have taken as a president, and maybe the most important decision he ever takes. If he actually starts bombing with American forces, Iran, that is a massive thing to be doing. Do you think it's, as Tucker Carlson says, something that could imperil his presidency?
We are in the unknown, so nobody knows how this is going to play out. I think we should all be honest about that and be fair. What I think it really fundamentally depends on is what you mean by the word involved. If you mean that America is going to help Israel shoot down ballistic missiles, I don't know that that will be such a major decision or will be seen as
Well, let me paint a picture where they use a B-52 bomber and they drop one of these buster bombs to try and get to the nuclear sites that the Israelis can't get to because they haven't got that technology. If they were to do that, in other words, directly use American forces to do the bombing, would your calculation about Trump change?
These are all hypotheticals, because the one thing that I do know, and I think Dave will tell you this himself, is the thing that people in the United States, from talking to people there, are most concerned about is any sort of boots on the ground scenario. They do not want American soldiers in the Middle East. I think they're right not to. I genuinely think that. And so fundamentally, it really depends on what happens and the way that it happens. And you're right, it is a big decision. But I think it's, but, you know, all this stuff, you know, I mean, Dave's calling for President Trump to be impeached over this, when this is something that he promised the American people 30 to 40 times on the campaign.
Well, okay. But on that, I would clarify that. He said that number of times that Iran should not be allowed to have a nuclear bomb. That is indisputable. He also has consistently portrayed himself as a man who wants peace, not war. I'm going to solve the problem in Ukraine, solve the Middle East, and so on. This would go against all of his claims to be that person. And of course, the big debate behind all this is that Tulsi Gabbard, his own director of national intelligence, the IAEA director last night, they both said in very recent times, including 24 hours ago, in the case of the Atomic Agency, that there is no evidence that they've seen that Iran is anywhere near progressing to an actual nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key point of this.
So I like Tulsi Gabbard. We've had her on Trigonometry. I think she's a great human being, which is why I did her the courtesy of watching the full clip of her testimony that she gave. And what she says in that testimony is that Iran is not pursuing the nuclear weapons program, but what Iran is doing is enriching uranium to 60% and beyond, which is a clear indication of their desire either to actually make nuclear weapons or to move much, much closer to a position to be able to make them. As I think Dave would concede from all the nuclear scientists, what they're saying is you need about 3 to 5% enriched uranium for civilian purposes. They are now enriching uranium to 60%. And by the way, this is also in the IAEA report, and no one's talking about this. They're using their 20% uranium to make 60% uranium, which is, again, an indicator of the fact that they're moving either towards attempting to make nuclear weapons at some point or to be in a position to do so. And that is the threat. And there is no other reason for them to be doing that. So yes, they don't have the exact bomb ready to go, but they're moving in that direction. And Israel is in a position to deal with that threat for the first time in a very long time. And I understand why they're doing it.
Okay, Dave, before we get to your response to that, just explain to people why you have called what Donald Trump is doing a betrayal and why you think he should be impeached.
Because I'm a fucking cuck.
Well, I think he has brought us into a war with Iran. Now, how much this war escalates, we will see. And I think that this is it is the most profoundly risky and reckless policy he could have pursued, or just about. I think this is very likely going to lead to a catastrophe, much like all of the other terror wars, including the one, Pierce, that you heroically led the opposition in the UK to in 2003, of course, referring to the war in Iraq. And as you remember well, Pierce, from that war, the justifications just kept constantly changing. And then when one fell away, they'd move to the next one. Oh, he was in on 9/11. Okay, he wasn't in on 9/11, but he's got weapons of mass destruction. Okay, he doesn't have weapons of mass destruction, but we have to liberate the people or bring democracy. And I've already seen that it's remarkable how sped up it is. I've already seen so many of the war hawks bouncing back and forth between all of these different justifications. But of course, in the end all of the justifications failed. Not only did he not have weapons of mass destruction, not only was he not in on 9/11, but we also didn't liberate the people. The worst thing that ever happened to the people of Iraq was George W. Bush's war there. And as far as Iran enriching up to 60%, yes, it's true that they only need, I think, between 3 to 5% for civilian nuclear purposes, and maybe some like around 20 to 25% for some medical needs. But that is what is known as a latent nuclear deterrent. There is another reason why they would have that. They want to demonstrate that they can get the bomb, but they don't have it right now to stop something like this happening. But the bottom line is that since 2007, our CIA has said they don't have nuclear weapons, and they're not striving to achieve them. Tulsi Gabbard, not only in her testimony, but in the Director of National Intelligence as her capacity serving that role, in the annual threat assessment just put out a couple months ago, reaffirmed the same thing. And so is the global community. Iran has been willing to negotiate this entire time. And maybe the negotiations haven't been successful, but even Benjamin Netanyahu, in his interview with Brett Baer the other day, couldn't even manage to lie and say that they've broken out and they're pursuing. He said maybe a year. The same thing he's been saying since I was 7 years old, lying over and over and over again because he wants a regime change war here. And he's said this in his own words, and so have all of the neoconservatives. Look, right here on your show, Pierce, which I think might be the most fascinating moment in the history of Uncensored, when General Wesley Clark reaffirmed that not only had he seen the plans to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years, but that it went all the way back to the early 90s, and that it was revived, in his words, in a study paid for by the Israelis. They've gotten the 6 other ones. This is the 7th one. This war is not about nukes that Iran doesn't have. And just one more point I would make as
he's throwing out a lot here, gish galloping galore. But this is what I'm talking about with Dave Smith. It's just all, like, I'm not saying like he doesn't have some good points or some solid, but it all comes down to just emotions, man. Like Dave Smith just completely talks out of emotions. And it's just all like, oh, Netanyahu bad, Israel bad, my dead Palestinian babies. Like that's all it comes down to. That's all I'm hearing. Some things he doesn't make sense. Like, well, just because Iran has all this uranium and they only need so much, but that's not a hint that they're. I mean, yeah, I guess they could be collecting it for different reasons, but I mean, is it what's most likely to be true though? And again, I don't even know the details. For all I know, Konstantin Kisin could be bullshitting here, but just going by these 2 arguments. I'm just saying that Dave Smith kind of loses me a little bit. It just sounds like he speaks from emotion.
As the great Scott Horton said the other day, look, I mean, even if they were developing nukes, which they're not,
they're not. How do you know? How do you know he's not? They're not is the thing. Like he just keeps asserting this that they're not though. But well, how do you know?
Knew that the Soviets were developing nukes. He didn't launch an aggressive war against them for it. And Johnson knew that Mao Zedong was developing nukes. He still didn't launch an aggressive war against the country. And the point is that you could sit here and say, just like they did with Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, you could sit here and say, no, we're just going to have a no-fly zone. We won't have boots on the ground. We won't have this. Look, Iran has already demonstrated, in a few days that this war has been going on, that they're more capable than all of the other countries we picked on in the terror wars. They've already hit Israel and killed people there. What's going to happen when a few Americans get killed? Hopefully this doesn't, but what's going to happen if that happens? What do you think Donald Trump's going to do?
Many of us carry around bulky, worn-out wallets that are uncomfortable and full of junk. The big question is why.
Buy Ridge
wallets can hold 12
It's the most ridgiest wallets you could find. It's no wallet that is ridgier than Ridge wallets. If you are in the market for a wallet that's ridgy, buy Ridge wallets.
So the Iranians are willing to negotiate, but the negotiations aren't going anywhere. That's a very strange way of looking at it.
No, exactly. This is what I'm talking about here. Like, even listen, I'm not pro, sending our money over there and getting involved. I'm not pro this whatsoever. But I just don't think Dave Smith is coming from a correct place, is what I'm saying.
Look, there's so much to address there, Piers. First of all, you got to think about this and understand this.
He's not coming from a rational place.
A lot of people think that Israel has just launched the war on Iran. That's not how Israel sees this at all. Israel has been at war with Iran since October the 7th, when an Iranian proxy, Hamas, attacked them. Mm-hmm. On October the 8th, an Iranian proxy, Hezbollah, began to fire rockets into Israel. Then the Houthis, another Iranian proxy, began to attack shipping and also Israel. Right now, what has happened since then is Israel has eliminated those threats to I was going to say deballed, but decapitated Hezbollah. They dealt with the threat of Hamas, and they are now in a position to deal with the threat they've always been concerned about. Now, why is Israel so concerned about this? Well, first of all, Iran has been saying for a very long time they don't want regime change in Israel. They want the state of Israel not to exist. Now, think about the fact that in the post-October 7 world, they cannot take the risk that they're only enriching uranium to 60% because they want to threaten to have nuclear weapons. That is not something they can do. And by the way, Piers, there's something that people don't seem to understand about. We struggle in the West. I really do think we all struggle in the West to understand the fundamentalist mindset. And let me give you an example of what the regime in Iran is like so that we can all understand what the threat here is. After the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran in 79, the war broke out between Iran and Iraq. And in that war, Iran was at a disadvantage. It was militarily backward. It wasn't financially able to deal with that. And you know what they did? They attempted to mitigate that by recruiting as many child soldiers as they could. We don't know how many because they didn't bother to count, but it's hundreds of thousands. And because some of them were too young and too weak to fight, they didn't send them to the front line. They sent them to sweep minefields with their own bodies. That is what this regime does. Now, if those people are willing to do that to their own children, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds, what do you think they would do to the children of their enemies if they get a nuclear weapon? Or
I'm sure Dave Smith would really sympathize with that. He's always like, oh my gosh, my dead Palestinian babies. I'm pretty sure he would absolutely feel for this, right? Well, I guess we'll have to see what Dave has to say about that.
They get close to, or if they're allowed to continue funding proxies around the Middle East in order to attack Israel, as they've already done.
Dave Smith.
Okay, can I respond to some of this, Piers? Because as I always insist when I come on your show, it's always ironically, I get called a moral relativist when I criticize Israel, but I'm the one who's always asking for an objective standard here that we can judge all sides on. Because it's just, you can just focus on the horrible things that Iran did in the 1980 war with Iraq, which Saddam Hussein launched, and the U.S. backed Saddam Hussein as he was using chemical weapons. And
so that justifies using children to walk into minefields.
No, that is not what I'm saying.
Okay,
let
so
me
what
finish
are you
my point here. Instead of just straw manning, well, I was about to say, so
okay.
Let me finish it. Okay. By the way, Israel never killed any children, as you know, Pierce, right? They have the most.
Israel is not sending its own.
See? Always. He has to always go back to his Palestinian babies, my dead Palestinian children. He's always got to do that. See what I'm talking about? Like, why I don't think he's coming from like I don't know how to articulate it, but it's not from a rational place. It's from a Israel bad, Netanyahu bad type of place. It's the same thing like with the left. Like when we say like, look, there seems to be a lot of the per capita blacks committing crime or something like that. And then they go, oh yeah, so white people have never committed crimes. And it's like, okay, they're not coming from like an unbiased, objective place. They're coming from specifically, they have their own narrative in their head. They have their own this view in their head, and that's all they see. You know,
own children into minefield. It's a massive difference.
Okay, Konstantin, let me finish my point, and then you can respond to it and see if you can take it on. Now, when you sit here and say that they've been at war with Iran since October 7th because Hamas is their proxies, what exactly, proxy means that I would think you have operational control over them or something like that.
Well, actually, let me explain what I think that means, because I've been arguing that point in terms of understanding where Israel comes from on this, which is there can be no doubt. I don't think, Dave, you would cast doubt on this, that Iran has financially and militarily given active and sustained support for a number of years to Hezbollah, to the Houthis, and to Hamas. I mean, you wouldn't dispute that.
Right. So, Piers, then by your logic and Konstantin's logic, is Israel our proxy? They just attacked Iran.
Well, I would say that Israel is actually, you could well argue, given the amount of support that America gives Israel militarily and economically, yes. I think,
fine.
But one person's ally is another person's proxy.
Can I make some points on this?
Hold on. Let me just.
Yeah. So I think ally, proxy.
Can I flesh out your, Dave? I'm very happy to hear a counter argument. Can I just flesh out Piers's point a little bit, if that's okay? So here's what we know. According to the State Department's own figures, Iran gives Hamas about $100 million a year, latest figures. They've been funding Hamas since the early 1990s. Yahya Sinwar said in 2017 that Iran is the single biggest military and financial backer of Hamas's military wing. In September 2023, a month before October the 7th, 500 Hamas fighters and Palestinian Islamic Jihad fighters were being trained by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard abroad. I can't remember if it's in Lebanon or in Iran proper. And there are numerous chronicled, documented meetings between senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Hamas and Hezbollah fighters in the lead up to it. What do you think they were doing? Talking about world peace and swapping hummus recipes? This is something that they've been involved in very heavily, and they continue to be involved in. And Hamas and Hezbollah are the sword hanging over Israel's neck that Iran has used in order to prevent the very thing that's happening now.
Dave?
Okay, so to
Hamas hummus coming to a store near you.
be clear here, it's an outrage that Iran has sold weapons and given money to Hamas, and therefore Hamas is their proxy. Yet, as we all know, Piers, and me and you have discussed this, 2 weeks before October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu sends the head of Mossad to Qatar to make sure that the funding to Hamas continues. Yet, is Hamas now a proxy of Israel? Is Israel at war with itself?
Well, I think on that point, I certainly think that Benjamin Netanyahu, when this is all over, is going to have a monumental day of reckoning. Not just in the corruption courts, but I think he's going to have a monumental day of reckoning about how he allowed this to happen on his watch, how Mossad so spectacularly dropped the ball. No one can give me a good explanation for why they can carry out this kind of attack on Hezbollah with the pages and carry out so precise an attack in Iran, but didn't apparently know that Hamas was spending 20 years building a tunnel system and didn't know 3,000 of them were about to pour over the border. I will never defend Netanyahu in this. I think he's going to be a busted flush. I suspect he sees this attack on Iran as being a chance to avoid being a busted flush for a little longer than it might have been the case. But there's going to be a day of reckoning for him. And the fact that he actively encouraged billions of dollars to be funneled to Hamas to create a divide and rule strategy between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority has also turned out to be one of the most catastrophically wrong things that an Israeli leader could possibly have done. So, look, that's where I sit with Netanyahu.
None of this makes Hamas an Israel proxy. Right?
Okay, fine. Well, yeah, I mean, it did kind of by the definition you guys gave me.
They're not the primary source of their funding or support.
Okay, fine. Okay, it's got to be primary, just being, okay, fine, whatever. Anyway, the point is this, right? Obviously, right now, Israel has taken out much of the Hezbollah leadership. The Houthis have been bombed. I think there's still a bit of a problem for them. They've been absolutely leveling Gaza. And so they think this is the moment. And of course, Bashar al-Assad fell as well. So now they think this is the moment for regime change in Iran. It's the same reason why people like Ben Shapiro were celebrating when Bashar al-Assad fell. Now the Shiite crescent is no longer supplying weapons from Iran to Hezbollah. But I'm not an Israeli. I'm an American. I'm not cheering when the emir of Al Qaeda takes over in Syria. And listen, whatever you put the risk at here, which if this thing keeps escalating, the risk of this going to a real ground war, another war in the war on terrorism. Let me be very clear when I say this. I don't know that America will survive this. We went into the terror wars in a much stronger place than we're going into this one. And this is a much tougher opponent than Saddam Hussein or Muammar Gaddafi. We didn't go into the terror wars $37 trillion in debt. We didn't go into the terror wars with the cultural and political and racial divides. We have mass protests in the streets right now over Donald Trump trying to enforce his immigration policy. This is going to be, this has the potential to be an utter disaster. And why should any American or British person, for that matter, why should any of us support this war? Because Israel thinks it's in their interest. Israel has attacked.
Well, I would argue.
Look,
I would argue it's not just in Israel's interest. I think Iran is an evil regime that oppresses its people, that has funded terrorism.
So was Saddam Hussein.
Well, yeah, I agree. But in Saddam Hussein's case, I never believed.
Saddam Hussein never funded terrorism.
Well, I never believed that Saddam Hussein had WMD. I think the difference
there was no terrorism in Iraq until we got rid of Saddam, actually.
Tax day has passed, but for millions of Americans, that's where the trouble begins.
What is this for?
The IRS is now ramping up enforcement for those who missed the April deadline or still owe back
taxes.
Network. Well, today's sponsor, Tax Network USA.
The most taxiest network that you'll ever find. You'll find no network taxier than Tax Network. I do my taxes from Tax Network. Everybody should do their taxes from Tax Network.
I think you can't hold any truck for this Iranian regime. I think a lot of Iranian people would agree with that. I think they would love to get rid of them. I think that Israel has every right to feel threatened by Iran's tentacles and the way they supported 3 different terror groups right on their border. So I'm not saying that you're not right, that this might all backfire. Let
me just ask you.
I'm not saying it may not backfire. I'm just saying I do understand why Israel has decided to do it now. I think they sense that Iran's regime has never been weaker because of what's happened in Syria, because of what happened to Hezbollah. What's been the most significant moment of the last week? Probably Hezbollah saying we're not getting involved in this, right? So, that to me was a very significant moment. And that may well have emboldened not just Israel to continue pummeling Iran, but also may have emboldened Trump to think, well, actually, if we're ever going to deal with this regime, now is the moment. Now, that's not to say, Dave, that you're not right, that this could all backfire horrendously. And if America gets sucked into a ground war, then it will be a complete nightmare. I've got no doubt about that.
Yes, but would you also concede, though, that if you allow Iran to enrich uranium, that also could backfire?
Yes, right? I was about to say that. And also I was about to say that Russia is now making pretty worrying noises that if America gets involved, it's not going to tolerate it. So you can't ignore that, given what's happening in Ukraine. But yeah, I think in your point, Konstantin, yes, I when I saw that IAE report, I read it and I thought they'd gone from 3% to 60% uranium enrichment. And there's only one reason you would do that. Either you take Dave's view, which is they're doing that because they want to have a form of nuclear deterrent without actually having a bomb. Or if you're Israel, you're like, these people have been funding terrorism against us for decades, and now they've gone from 3% to 60%, way more than is needed for any civilian use. Clearly, they are on a fast track here to be a nuclear power, and we cannot allow that to happen. So I do, well, let Konstantin respond first, but that's why I do understand
let's be honest,
Israel feels the way it does.
Well, exactly, and let's be honest about something here, Piers. The 3 of us are sitting in comfortable air-conditioned studios on the other side of the world from the region where this is happening. We have the luxury to pontificate about the real reason that Iran is enriching uranium to near weapons grade. Israel does not have the ability to get this wrong and then go, well, I apologize, I got this one wrong, as Dave has done with President Trump. He supported him being elected, and now he's I got it wrong, guys, let's impeach him. Israel, if it gets this wrong, gets enough.
I like that little I like that little shot out there. Konstantin just had to get that little dig in there.
Annihilated. They do not have the luxury of that. Now, Dave, I think the point you make about the American people, I have the greatest respect for the American people, and they should determine the course of America themselves. They've elected Donald Trump, and that is the reality. No one here, Piers found out, I think, with some history that Americans don't like being told what to do by foreigners. And I'm certainly not.
Oh, is it like when Piers goes on, he's like, oh, my First Amendment, you should not say the R slur on the air. Oh, you shouldn't say this. And then we get all pissed off at him like, yeah, that's true.
They're not going to do that. It's up to the American people. I know the American people don't want boots on the ground, and neither do I. And neither do sensible people, I think. I think the extent of Americans' involvement should be to help Israel defend itself against the missile attacks and let them get the job done themselves. I agree with you. This is Israel's war. They should prosecute it to the best of their ability, and they should deal with the threat that they face from Iran. I don't want a massive involvement of the West. I don't think that's what we need. And by the way, Piers, just one quick point, slightly tangential, but not necessarily important. For those people who care about what's happening in Ukraine, this is brilliant for Ukraine because Iran has been one of the biggest suppliers of drones, the suicide drones that have been raining down in Ukrainian cities and killing civilians and military personnel there. The fact that Iran and Russia are now having to deal with the situation takes a lot of pressure off Ukraine, and it's good for that reason as well.
All right, Dave, the one thing I would quibble with about what you said earlier was about the way that Iran has responded. They always threaten annihilation when they get attacked, right? Or when they're involved in any kind of skirmish. We've heard it towards the end of last year and nothing really happened. We've heard it again now. And although, yes, they've got through the Iron Dome several times, they've killed some civilians in Tel Aviv. This is indisputable. So they technically have done better in terms of their revenge attack than other countries have fared against Israel. I accept that. But I also think we are far removed from seeing any kind of, huge resistance coming out of Iran. In fact, what you're seeing is their bluff potentially getting called here, that a lot of it has been rhetoric built on sand, literally, and that they don't actually have the military capability to even tackle a country 1/10 its size in terms of population, let alone if the United States was to get involved. So I think what you're seeing is actually the opposite of the way you characterized it. I don't think you're seeing a massive response from Iran. I think you're seeing as good as they can do, and it's not very much.
Well, look, I mean, this is what remains to be seen, and we don't know. But in 2007, when Dick Cheney was trying to push George W. Bush into war with Iran, it was the Pentagon who stopped George W. Bush from doing it. And it was them who said that we do not have escalation dominance over Iran, essentially meaning that we have, we still have thousands of troops in Iraq right now. We have bases and embassies all throughout the region that they can touch. Now, we'll see, I guess, Piers. I guess we're going to play this game. I guess we're going to play this incredibly risky game.
I agree, it's high risk.
For no reason, essentially, from the United States of America's interests. And, look, this stuff, I'm sorry, I just find this to be too ridiculous. All of the intelligence is saying that they don't have nuclear weapons and they're not pursuing nuclear weapons. There is one country, one government in the Middle East that is not a member of the non-proliferation treaties that has nuclear weapons secretly. And it ain't Iran, it's Israel.
I knew it. I was like, how is Dave going to bring this back to it's Israel, right? I knew it, man. This dude. See, I think that's what it is. I think Dave has Israel derangement syndrome. IDS, he has. Maybe some IBS too, but definitely IDS.
Ridiculous.
Well, I agree. It's absurd. As you know, I agree. Look, I agree. I don't understand how Israel is allowed to continue pretending they don't have.
And also,
and by the way, I'm not even saying like, oh, Dave's wrong. They don't have weapons or he's lying or something. It's just that he is just hyper focused on Israel. He has it. He has the IDS, the Israel bad, tiny hat people bad, And I think that's clouding his ability to see things objectively here.
But what are you saying? Are you saying Israel, Iran should develop nuclear weapons to compensate for that reality? Or
No. What I'm saying is this, okay? Whenever you guys talk about this, even already, and Pierce, I got to say, I thought you were a little bit guilty of this right after October 7th, understandably, perhaps so. But even right now, whenever we talk, it's all about the Israeli perspective, as if we're all Israelis. Oh, Israel can't take the risk that they have 60% enrichment. Israel can't get this wrong the way I could change my mind about supporting Donald Trump. I guess Israel can get it wrong when they lure America into a war, when they pump out propaganda saying that Saddam has weapons of mass destruction. That's okay when they get that one wrong, but they can't get this one wrong. Okay, fine.
Why are you blaming Israel for that? It was your own government lying to us about that. I was protesting against the war in Iraq exactly the same way you and Pierce.
We all oppose
but it was our governments lying to us. It wasn't about Israel. Why is everything that happens in the world the fall of Israel day?
Oh, dang. So now even they're starting to see it. Even Konstantin's starting to kind of see that, like, Dave Smith has Israel on the brain, living rent free in his head. Maybe if Israel does have to leave that little part of land that everyone wants them out of there, maybe they can move into Dave's head, huh? They could occupy it. They seem like they're already occupied there already.
This is such a blatant straw man. I didn't say everything in the world is the fault of Israel. I'm saying they were also guilty of this.
But why are you putting the emphasis on them when George W. Bush and Tony Blair were using their bully pulpits to make this point to a far wider audience than some guy in the Middle East called Benjamin Netanyahu?
If you think that I am removing any of the blame from George W. Bush or Tony Blair, I assure you, you're wrong, and you don't know what you're talking about. I've been blasting them for years. They're war criminals who should be in the Hague.
I agree.
That is not the issue. We are talking specifically about the nation of Israel right now, so I'm talking about their responsibility. And why is it, by the way, that this is always a one-way street? I hear all the hawks constantly being like, Iran said this, Iran threatened this. What about the threats in the other direction? Maybe Iran feels like they don't have a choice to not. So look, Muammar Gaddafi, Iran is on the list of 7 countries that are supposed to be overthrown. The U.S. government went and overthrew both of their next door neighbors, invaded the countries and destroyed them after putting Iran on the axis of evil list when they had nothing to do with 9/11. And then when Muammar Gaddafi denuclearized, they went in there and overthrew him in the most violent, brutal way, was sodomized to death by a pack of madmen. Maybe Iran also feels that they can't get this one wrong. Why are we doing this? This is a country that poses no threat to the United States of America. And if you guys want to try to hang on the fence here and go, hey, I'm not telling Americans what to do, I think Israel should do it on their own. But that's just a fantasy land. They're not doing it on their own. They're doing it with our weapons, with our intelligence support, with our money, with us protecting them from a retaliation strike, and at least possibly with our president using negotiations to dupe Iran into thinking that they weren't at risk. I mean, that's what Benjamin Netanyahu says, and that's what some other reporting says. Maybe that's not the case, but either way, he pretended like he was afterward. So no, none of this is being done without America. This is about a regime change war.
Yeah, Christopher Shame. We're watching Dave Smith freak out on Piers Morgan and his Israel derangement syndrome coming to the surface. And we're starting to see how much Israel just really is just living rent-free in his head. He's exposing himself.
All of them said it in their own words. They're on record. Do you guys think Benjamin Netanyahu has been mistaken for 30 years, claiming that Iran is 1 year to 3 years away from a nuke? Or was he lying?
Well, I think, listen, I think the reality is, the thing that struck me was going from 3% to 60% suggests an intent. It suggests an incontrovertible. No one disputes.
They're not the only country that does this.
But nobody disputes that Iran has gone from 3% to 60% in uranium enrichment, right? So that is all. Unlike with Saddam and the WMD that didn't exist, that is indisputable. It's just how you interpret what they're intending to do with that. And let me ask you.
Can I just one quick thing on this? So first of all those regime wars you're talking about are the fault of the U.S. and other Western governments who pursued them. That's who's responsible. That's who should be to blame. And as you say, should be prosecuted for that. But the reason people rightly call you a moral relativist, Dave, is that you don't seem to understand the difference between, yes, I think it's quite clear that Benjamin Netanyahu wants regime change in Iran, but that is not the same as the regime in Iran wanting to destroy Israel. There's a big difference. If the mullahs in Iran wanted a different prime minister of Israel, that is not the same as wanting to destroy their entire country. And the reason Israel is as paranoid about these things as it is, let's be honest, it's surrounded, or at least was until recently when opinion in many Arab countries changed towards Israel, thanks to President Trump's Abraham Accords. Israel was surrounded by many, many countries who don't believe that it has a right to exist. And that's the difference. And that's why people call you a moral relativist.
Well, okay, well, that's totally ridiculous and makes no sense at all. And it only works. I'm about to answer, Konstantin. Let me finish. Because it only makes sense when you only say, I ascribe the worst of intentions to this regime and the best of intentions to this. What was overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi? Was that simply replacing the leader, or was that destroying the country, turning it into a failed state?
You've brought in a different conflict. Let's stick to Israel and Iran.
No.
The Israelis say we want regime change. The Iranians say we want to wipe you off the map. So that's pretty different.
Hold on. So I'm the moral relativist.
Yes.
But then when I point out what one side actually did, you run away from it and say, oh, no, we can't talk about that.
It's your government that destroyed Libya. It's not Israel. It's your government.
Know anything about this? Israel was lobbying for us to do this for years.
Who made the decision to do that?
Our government, and I hold them criminally responsible.
So blame them.
Yes, Konstantin, why are you an Israeli? Why are you constantly running cover for them?
Are you an Israeli? Holy cow, dude, Dave is crashing out. So now he's resorting to the, you must be paid by Israel, you must be Israeli.
I believe in speaking the truth and being honest instead of dragging in stuff that's irrelevant.
No. It's not irrelevant at all. What are you talking about? Yes, my government is criminally responsible for the wars that they launched. And the Israeli government is also responsible for constantly trying to lure my government into more wars. That's what I'm standing up against right now.
So the American government is so gullible that they just go around invading countries on the say-so of Israel.
Dude.
Again, what a straw man, dude. Benjamin Netanyahu came to America in 2002 and testified before Congress that the U.S. should overthrow Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, and the Iranian regime. This isn't a secret. He's advocating that we fight more wars. And I'm telling you that this war, which we do not need to fight, which is not in our interest, has the potential to be devastating to our country, let alone the region. What is the moral relativism in any of that?
I'm not saying the Iranians are good people. One side wants to wipe the other one from the map. The other side wants not to have people who want to do that in charge of that country.
But
that's the difference.
But Pierce, do you not get my, let me just see, Pierce, do you get my point here? This is what they said from the very beginning of the war in Gaza. Israel doesn't want to wipe Gaza off the map. Israel just wants to retrieve the hostages and get it, but they are wiping it off the map. So why do you just get to have this standard where you decide what they want to do? I can't base it on their track record. We can't look at Iraq. We can't look at Libya. We can't look at Afghanistan. Evidently, as all the hogs can see, we can look at World War II. Everything is just like World War II, but it's not like the last 25 years of terror wars. These guys have wiped countries off the map left and right.
Well, as you know,
it's their track record.
Yeah, as you know, I've been increasingly critical of the Israel strategy in Gaza. It makes no sense until you hear people like Smodrich talking brazenly and openly about ethnic cleansing. I mean, it doesn't make any pretense. And at that point, I do think that there are certainly people on that in that government at senior level who absolutely want to get all the Palestinians out of Gaza, out of the West Bank. And if that has been their plan all along from October the 8th, then I was duped, and people that feared that were correct. And we'll have to see how that plays itself out. I hope that is not going to actually be the case. And the people who say from the Israeli side, they say to me, well, you know, Smodrich isn't the government. Well, he's a pretty senior member of that government, and he's not even hiding what he thinks should be happening. Before we finish this, guys, I want to just talk about the politics here for Trump as well, because it's really interesting to me. Konstantin, you've got the conservative right in America absolutely split down the middle. You've got Tucker Carlson on one side, and a lot of people who agree with him that this could be a disaster for America, for Trump. He shouldn't be doing it. Obviously, Dave and Tucker Carlson, now unusual bedfellows on this, but there's always a first time for everything. But you also have a lot of people on the conservative right, Lindsey Graham, John Bolton, others who are absolutely gung-ho to get stuck into Iran here. Is there a danger that politically this really does fragment Trump's base support? And what does that mean for the Republicans, for MAGA, for Trump, for the future, for J.D. Vance and people who are aligned with Trump maybe at the next election and so on?
Well, I should preface this by saying I'm an outsider observer in the United States. I do go there a lot. I spend a lot of time there. I speak to people there, but I certainly wouldn't claim to be, the greatest expert in the world about what's happening in America. My sense, unexpert sense of this, is that actually I think your presentation of it is a very online focused presentation. I think if you look at the polling, the vast majority of people in America are basically in the position I described earlier, which is they don't want Iran to get anywhere near or continue to get closer to developing nuclear weapons, and they don't want American boots on the ground. And that's the dilemma that Donald Trump has to navigate. And if he can do that...
Well, there's a third dilemma. You see, this is where it gets more complicated, because I don't think he's even thinking about boots on the ground, but I do think he is thinking, probably as we speak, about whether he allows an American B-52 to take a 30,000-pound bomb and drop it on the nuclear sites, which Israel hasn't got the ability to get to.
Yeah.
I think that is probably
honest,
more likely than not right now.
So let's be honest,
what he may order.
If that happens and it's successful and it doesn't lead to an escalation, everyone's going to love it, because Americans love to win and they love to bomb shit, right? Let's be honest. That's the history of the last 20 years. And if that happens, they'll be very happy. And if it goes in a different direction, they will be very unhappy. So you're right, it's a big call. And I don't think anyone sitting here, or frankly anywhere, knows how it's actually going to play out, or whether it's a good idea. And, I'm not sitting here advocating for that necessarily. I think Israel seems to be doing enough damage to significantly degrade any attempts Iran is making to have a nuclear enrichment program, and I hope that's the thing that we pursue. By the way, I don't think it's split MAGA down the middle at all. That's what it appears like on X. I really don't think, when you talk to ordinary people, that's the situation in America, especially in the Republican Party, which is overwhelmingly pro-Israel and has been for a very long time.
Okay, Dave Smith.
There's no question. I mean, I largely agree with Konstantin there. I think if Trump can thread the needle here and not lead to a catastrophe, that he can survive this politically. I do think he's downplaying the split a little bit. It's not just about like polls about how people feel about boots on the ground, which obviously the American people are largely opposed to. And yes, it is true that most of the Republicans do support Israel, although poll after poll has demonstrated that this is really changing with the younger generation. But look, I mean, you have a situation right now, and yesterday, like, I started the day by denouncing Donald Trump, and I was, taking a lot, trending on Twitter and getting a lot of praise and a lot of insults and all that stuff. But by the end of the day, it was like Tucker Carlson was being insulted by Donald Trump for not even criticizing him, really just criticizing the policy while heaping praise on Donald Trump. But Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, I mean, some of the most influential conservative voices in the United States of America have all come out and really drawn a red line that we do not want to have another war here. So the point is that if it does get to that, and that's a big if, but if it does come to that point, like a real boots on the ground war, Donald Trump will absolutely destroy his coalition and his legacy along with it, as well as his entire domestic agenda. I mean, you need as much political capital as you can get when there's people out on the streets protesting against his immigration policies. And he's risking squandering all of this for something that's absolutely no threat to the United States of America at all, on the side of the country who secretly developed nukes and is not in the non-proliferation treaty, against the country who doesn't have nukes and is in the non-proliferation treaty. It's the most reckless madness a policy could possibly be.
Well, he's not pursuing that policy. This is what the point I keep making to Dave. What you keep doing, Dave, is taking to the extremist position. No one's talking about boots on the ground except the usual Lindsey Grahams, who no one in the Trump cabinet takes seriously on these issues at all.
I don't know about that.
They don't. The conversation that's happening is about what is the right level of America's involvement. We will see what that is. And by the way, look, I haven't seen Charlie Kirk, who is genuinely influential, I think, within the MAGA movement, criticize President Trump. I think he's been kind of balanced in his commentary. All the other people, the Candace Owens, the Tucker Carlsons, etc., the vast majority of people within the conservative movement in America are not taking their opinion on this issue, and the polls bear that out.
Tucker,
I would say
Tucker, I think he's a significant voice.
These people have huge audiences.
Well,
I'm not saying.
Yeah, well, we're not saying that they're not huge. It's just that they're kind of, they're at least Candace Owens. I'm not sure about Tucker Carlson, but Candace Owens at least is in the Dave Smith camp where she has the Isreal derangement syndrome. You know, it's kind of like how on the left, how we kind of stop listening to them when it comes to Donald Trump because they have TDS, they have Trump derangement syndrome. Anything Donald Trump does is super bad. And it's kind of like we're kind of just shutting them out now because we kind of just learned that no matter what Donald Trump does, they're gonna hate on it and treat it like it's the biggest thing, the biggest worst thing in the world. So we don't really pay attention to them no more. Dave Smith and Candace Owens are kind of moving in that direction a little bit, where it's like Israel derangement syndrome. Anything Israel does is bad. And that's the thing. It's just like, obviously you have a clear bias. You have a clear derangement toward Israel. So I'm not really going to listen to what you have to say because you're speaking from a place of severe bias. So I think that's what Konstantin was kind of trying to say. You know, I know Konstantin and others try to label Dave Smith and Candace Owens and all these other people woke right. And listen, you know, my position on it's ridiculous. There is no woke right. It's stupid. It's dumb. You know, you could think of a better term than woke right, but it's contradictory. Doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. You're not going to get anyone to side with you with that. You could come up with a different term maybe for all these people over here that have Israel derangement syndrome, but woke right's not it. Man, I had another point too, because I gotta go here, so I gotta end it here. If you want to see the rest of this, there's like 10 minutes left. You know, you could go to Piers Morgan's channel. It's like the newest video he has. Yeah, I what I was gonna say, I think, was like, because everyone's banking that this is gonna splinter Donald Trump's base, and it could possibly. We're kind of just waiting and seeing. No one really knows what's going on yet, you know. But Dave Smith is already abandon it and be like, oh, I apologize for voting for him and I apologize for supporting him, you know, real cuckoldery stuff. And it's stupid. It's like, oh, it's dumb, but he's already made this this definite position when it's kind of premature. And a lot of people are kind of doing that. A lot of people are kind of freaking out over it, and they're already taking hard stance positions on things that haven't already been settled yet. You know, and I talked about this the other day, how people flip out on here and they take these hard stances and we don't even know that's going to happen. People did that with the immigration stuff recently. We're like, oh, he backtracked on immigration because he doesn't want to send back the farmers, when Donald Trump didn't even make a hard decision yet. He kind of just floated it out there. And now the next day or 2 days later, then he walked it back and said, no, hard ICE deportations, mass deportations are going to continue. But people are already freaking out about it. And I was there before he made his decision. I was there saying, guys, can we calm down? Like, we don't know what's going on yet. And you're already freaking out and making all these hard stances. Yes, this could happen. Yes, that could happen. Yes, this could happen. Yes, that could happen. But we're going to have to wait and see before we take any hard stances on it. Dave Smith over here has already taken his hard stance with his whole, I apologize for voting for him. I never apologize for voting for someone. And that's the thing. It's like, can we just chill out? Chill out. We could talk about this. We could discuss this. We could give our theories. But let's settle down on the hard stances, because you end up making yourself look stupid. And it makes you look like you're going to use any chance that you get to abandon Trump. You know, like any chance that you get, you're going to take it. And it's like, okay, if you really believe in Trump, like if you really think he's going to do the right thing, if you really support him, then let's just relax and wait. And if he makes a horrible decision, if this leads to another war, if this leads to World War III or what have you, then we could come down and cast our judgments on Donald Trump and his decision. Then we could say, all right, you know what? You know, screw him, or whatever your position is at that time. But let's just wait. All right. We could debate, we could talk. But before we take any hardline stances, let's chill out a bit. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel. I got more Piers Morgan. I got more Dave Smith. I even got some Konstantin Kisin stuff. And give this video a like if you haven't already. And leave a comment if you got something you like to add. And I'll see you guys later.